All right, time to get to work. First thing we got to do is get all the oil out of this bad boy. Oh, this one balances a little funny. Of course, LKQ never drains the oil out of these things. Good opportunity to showcase what goes on with the 0A4 cases though. Volkswagen made a change to the bell housing starting in the Mark V, where they changed the 0A4, and they don't drain the bell housing very well. Or at least the oil doesn't drain into the bell housing very well. So they gave you a goofy special procedure to not only remove this drain plug from the differential housing, but also to remove a shift pin on the bottom of the transmission all the way back here to drain the remainder of the oil out of the rest of the gearbox. Kind of silly. Don't know why exactly they did it, unless it was just some weird attempt to try and reinforce this whole pinion area. So you'll see when I take it apart, there's a piece of casting that blocks the oil flow from getting into the differential region very well on these cases. Let's see how I want to do this. Nope, that's not going to be ideal. Alright, let's try that. See how it goes. Let's see. Alright, now for the rest of the oil. We'll just put this back in for now. Just to keep it from puking everywhere for the time being. Alright. Next up, we're going to start pulling off axle flanges. Remove the axle seals. Start taking the bolts off on the front bell housing side here. 6mm Allen holding those in the center. Won't be needing that again for a while. Let me see here. This one. 8mm triple square holding on our input shaft seal and throwout bearing guide tube assembly. And this is going to get replaced with a brand new one, whole new assembly. So in the trash that goes. We're going to get off our seals. So somewhere around the late 02Js into the 0A4s, they changed the seal on the passenger side. Instead of being a flange that will press in first and then you press the seal into the flange, the seal itself is the main thing that presses in, and this is just kind of like a plastic protector that goes on top of the seal. They're much more of a pain to remove than some of the older ones. The flange comes off easy enough, but now you have to kind of hammer to form the hell out of the seal to get the thing out. Now I got enough of a space to grab onto it. I can usually pop it out using that guy, like so. And our diff seal here, just like so. And now the part I'm actually not all that familiar with just yet. I've not taken out apart a genuine 02S from Volkswagen with the extra gear that's in this casing. I'm used to there being this kind of stamped steel metal pan in the back of the transmission. Same bolt pattern obviously, but whole extra gear set and a couple of extra bearings and everything that are going to go in here. That's all going to be new to me. And it's going to hold more oil too. Alright, looks like Volkswagen did give us a couple of decent spots where we could potentially pry on or maybe hammer on it to get it out. Let's try that. Might need a bigger pry bar. Stubborn. Do we really want to hammer on this to get it off? I don't know. There we go. Guess so. Sliding off my hammer I got supporting this thing. It's even got a little extra case magnet back here. That's kind of neat. Don't have that in the 5-speeds. They got a case magnet in the bell housing, but not in the 5th gear section of things. Alright, one of the first things I'm going to do is put it in the 5th gear, like that. That's 5th, that's 6th, back to neutral. And I can take this piece off. Actually, I accidentally went back to neutral. I want it to stay in 5th gear. And then I put the lever on top of the transmission, since it's now disconnected from here, into 1st gear. Doing that kind of locks up the transmission internally, so I can loosen these bolts easier. You got 14 millimeter triple square on the end there. Actually, Loctite these bolts didn't used to do that on the 5 speeds. That's cool. Now with those loosened, we can just go back to neutral here. We have some goofy little spring underneath the synchro. That's also a little new and different. Interesting. Alright. Alright, next thing we're going to do, we're going to tip this thing up on its end and start pulling some gears off so we can split it open. Making a mess, of course. Oop, a lot more left in the transmission than I thought, huh? Alright. Soak up what we can there. I think I'll try pulling off 6th gear output first. See how that goes. Well, that gear's a good bit smaller than I'm used to. Let's see here. Well, might need to apply some heat on this one too, just because it is maybe a little newer than I'm used to dealing with. Alright, I had to do a little modification to my puller, cut some more threads on it, and also drilled a little pilot hole in the bolt I've been using to press against, and that's finally allowed me to start to get a little bit of progress in pulling output of 6th gear off. And there we go. And there's a separate bearing piece, or at least a piece that'll interface with the bearing in the back case. I'm going to try and keep all these oriented. So, I guess the piece with this line faces that bearing surface. And I also noticed that the selector is not symmetrical, and this extra piece of collar sticks up closer towards the 6th gear side of things. And speaking of, that'll be the next up. Oop, this nice sleeve that comes out. Give us just enough space to work with. So I did splurge and buy a very expensive specialty Volkswagen puller tool for this job. Looks like it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get everything in place here though. You're supposed to be able to go underneath the synchro for 5th gear and pull it off that way. But I don't know how much space I'm going to have with that selector still there. Let's try. There we go. I'll try to make sure it's getting under the synchro. I think this gear is holding me up though. I may have to rethink this. Actually use the pull straight on the gear. I don't know. Let's see. It's not quite thin enough to do that. The plot thickens. Well, I might have to go RTFM and see what I'm missing here. All right, after kind of mulling this one over a little while and looking at the manual, which was not of a whole lot of help, usually I use this to pull from underneath the selector. And it's like the 6th gear is so big on the input shaft because it's such a tall gear that it interferes with this special puller I spent way too much money on from Volkswagen. But after looking at it more closely, it looked like I could actually get underneath the engagement teeth of 6th gear on the input shaft, although I do have to be careful not to completely destroy this little spring behind the synchro. So that's what I'm going to try to do, see if I can get it to sneak in there. And so far so good, because it does have a bulge out here that actually fits this gear nicely. Just wouldn't fit this gear when it was all the way up here trying to pull from the selector. So I guess I'm just going to have to pull from, you know, one at a time here, one gear at a time. This puller from Volkswagen ran more than $400. It's a pretty expensive piece of kit. So not everybody is going to want to spend that money, but since I am somebody who does this a lot, I figured it was better to spend the money on something that would make the job a lot faster and easier on all of the 5-speeds and as well as the 6-speed. Oh yeah, this is a Volkswagen T10309. The whole kit has a whole lot of different, well, at least a handful of different adapters, different sizes. This is the biggest set in the kit. So this is our 6th gear, and it looks like everything came out looking just fine. No damage to those teeth. Our synchro and its spring look okay. Keep all this together for now. Put that back on there. And yeah, this synchro is a little bit different than what the 5-speeds normally use. Although the 5-speeds the replacement synchros did start using this taller tab like this, but they have fewer engagement teeth and they're much larger. They don't have the spring. So yeah, they've changed a couple things for the 02S. You got a built-in washer in the back of this guy. Go ahead and keep that together. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Pull the needle bearing out. Stick that in the gear for now. Just keep that together. And now, let's go ahead and pull the selector out. So same thing, except this time we're actually going to try to pull from underneath the synchro itself on 5th gear. And since we're going all the way around 360 degrees on the synchro, you're not going to bend or tweak any one tiny spot. It's I'm going to pull nice and evenly across the whole thing, and it should just come right out. I rotate this around to kind of get the space to line everything up. And we're still under the sinker there. Let me go around this way maybe. No, actually, you know what? I'll take this all together. Since this is already on, rotate that around, keep it there. And then there we go. Look out. Almost broke a window. Okay. There's our selector. The little tabs came out and all the fracas, but that's okay. Put that back later. And keep this oriented the way it was. This extra piece of color facing towards 6th gear, and this goes on top of that. Actually, let's just go ahead and I'll reassemble this later because I'll probably just clean this as its own independent part. 5th gear just pulls off since there's no splines there. It just rides on the needle bearing on the selector side of things. Let's get stuff put back away. Everything's slippery with all the gear oil on it. Nope. I think I goobered this up a little bit. That's better. Okay. Last but not least, output 5th gear. Let's grab our bolt here. Boy, there is not a whole lot of room to grab onto this guy. Looks like they moved the casing to where it can barely even get to the under the teeth of that gear. That's not cool. Well, I think I'm going to have to do this one arm at a time. There is just nothing to grab onto there. That's pretty wild. Well, let's give it some heat. I might have to do is get creative. I may not be able to use a puller at all, so I think I'm going to go ahead and plug in my air compressor. Start taking off all the rest of these bolts, and then I'm going to use the air hammer to help get the rest of this off. Just use this one. That'll be better. Let's get our shift tower out. Oop. Make sure we're neutral before we pull this thing out. The shaft moves up and down like that. You're neutral. Alright, there's our 02S shift tower. Let's go ahead and replace it. Right there. Get all these out of the way. So now we need to get our shift pins out, and also the 3 bolts that hold the reverse upper bearing support. Now I'll just go ahead and get these off right now. Okay. And let's actually take this casting off. This is actually a bushing support for the bottom of the shift tower. There we go. And this actually supports the bottom there. Here we need a shorter extension, I think. Don't forget that guy. It's one of your reverse idler bearing supports, as was this one, and then this third guy here. This one, again, from the previous video, does not exist on the 02J. The 02J just has the one here and the one in here. Take our shift pins out. And let's again not forget this last bolt for that reverse shaft support. So with all of these out, and try and crack the case open. Won't be able to go far with their 5th gear output still there, but at least if I can just get it to crack like so, it'll be a good start. And then air chisel time. This is going to be fun. I'm going to actually have to go more like this. Try and provide some counter pressure as you're pushing on the shaft this way. And this, I take it, is why Volkswagen has a whole other expensive special rig that bolts onto the top here to help pull this whole thing apart. So it'll actually press on the shaft and then effectively be pulling the case up. There's a whole another set of really expensive special tools, and from the research I had done, it looked like I would be able to do without it by pulling off these gears individually rather than all in one fell swoop. But clearly, without that tool, it is a lot more of a challenge than is normal for splitting a case in one of these. Well, I made a little bit of progress. You can see I got a gap now started on that gear to the case. I had to kind of put it back together, reseat everything, and run the nuts in for the pinion, hold it into the bell housing, and then kind of use a pry bar on one side or the other, alternating, and the air chisel, and it's finally starting to come. There we go. I don't need no fancy extra $400 puller beyond what I already paid for. Goodness. Well, there's 5th gear output. Everything looks good. Anyway, so here we are on the inside of the transmission. One thing that you will not see on a 02J is this little plastic trough. This plastic trough they started putting in the 0A4 5-speeds with the Mark V, and it goes all the way back into the 5th gear, 6th gear in this case, 5th and 6th region. So as a differential spinning, it's splashing oil that'll get, some of which will get caught by this trough and eventually work its way into the 5th and 6th gear region. And what I might do, since I'm using a 02J back case half, I just might drill a hole the exact same size in the 02J case and use this trough. Nice little oiling mod, maybe. Why not? So there we go. We are taking apart. But before I can get too far, I do have to remove the nuts once more that hold on the pinion shaft into the bell housing. But our selector here just pulls right off. Everything here looks pretty clean and in good shape. It's getting a little messy over here. And this applies to all MQ250 family transmissions. Your reverse gear right here slides up and down, and it's actually engaging with the selector collar for first and second gear. So if we go here, that's first gear, back to neutral. That's second gear. Up here is another collar. There's third gear. That's fourth gear. When you go to select reverse, obviously this needs to be in the neutral position, and then this slider gear gets pushed up to engage the selector collar for first and second to drive it in reverse. This is the goofy upper bearing support that has 3 bolts. If I dig out one from a 02J, you'll see a pretty obvious difference. Let's see if I can find one in my stash over here. Oh, let's see. Here's one. Very dirty one. But yeah, there's a lot less to it, huh? And you can see when I line these up, or at least line up the bolt hole, that this bearing on the 0A4 02S version sits lower. So they do actually have a different reverse idler shaft. Here's one that doesn't have a gear on it right now. That's actually out of a 0A4 as well. Let's see, do I have a 02J version? Somewhere I do, I'm sure. But I suppose you could just use this in the 02J and just not use the third bolt. That would be a possibility as well. Alright, so now the whole arm that moves and has this over center spring in here, see that? That operates the reverse lever. That's going to come out. Another T45 screw. There we go. And I can kind of move the input shaft a little bit out of the way. Pull up the reverse idler shaft and the reverse gear itself. One of the things that is different about this, I think I mentioned, first gear is actually shorter. So this gear that engages first on the input shaft does need to come with this. You can't use the one out of the Mark IV TDI because they have a different first gear ratio. So you have to use this gear out of the 0A4 02S assembly. And now we can kind of roll this input shaft out of the way. I'm going to have to flip it back over and remove the nuts securing the pinion shaft to the bell housing. I have to support the differential too. It's all going to come flying out. All right. So let's take our extra long pinion shaft here, pull it out, and our differential. We'll have to pull out a 02J bell housing to show everybody the difference here. Do I have one loose? Yeah, I think we got one right here. It's a very dirty one. Hasn't been through the parts washer yet. But let's see some of the differences here. So, right away, you can see there's a much different diameter to the pinion bearing. It's a much bigger pinion bearing on the 02S and late 0A4s. And it has a lip to the outer race. So this whole machining on the case is completely different. The other thing that's going to be obviously different, there's clearly no vehicle speed sensor coming through here. This is a vehicle speed sensor on the 02J still installed, and you can also see it even has this little support here, a little pilot bearing of sorts or bushing just to support the bottom half of that. There's not even any vestigial piece of casting on the 0A4 casings for that. It's all gone. The other big difference, I was talking earlier about the special drain and fill procedure on all 0A4s as well as this 02S 6-speed, and that's primarily because this piece of casting right here is blocking the oil from draining very effectively into the differential. So you look on the 02J, it's all completely open right here. So you have relatively free flow, you know, as soon as you're filling the transmission up for that oil to get into the differential housing. So this is why Volkswagen has that goofy tech tip about filling the transmission up. Well, A, you have the special drain procedure where you're not only removing this drain plug, but you also have to remove one of these shift pins from the bottom of the transmission to get all of the oil out, because clearly just removing this, you're only going to drain what's primarily here, and this tiny, tiny hole is so slow at allowing any other oil to get through it that you're never going to get all of the differential oil out unless you let it sit there for days. So they advise you to remove that shift pin, and then once you reinstall both the drain plug and that shift pin, they have you fill it from the shift tower, take out the reverse light switch usually, and have you fill it with an exact amount there, because clearly when you're unable to have the oil drained efficiently into the differential, this fill plug is no longer going to be a very good way to get oil into the transmission, because you'll fill up this whole half of the casing here to one extent, but then there's not going to be anything in the differential as you're doing that, or at least very minimal amounts. Not only that, but I don't know if you can also see, boy, this is actually even worse than the 02J. So, when you look here, there is no good drainage hole to get oil into this half of the transmission. It has to kind of pass through this bearing and pass through this little opening here, and then get some splashed in by the differential through the trough that I had removed up there. So some people do make an additional hole. This is actually a bolt hole, so that's once the bolt's in there, obviously that's going to be filled. And you can put in another bolt, another hole right here, and then the oil will drain into the 5th and 6th gear region a little bit more efficiently. This kind of applies to the 02J as well. I think they do have another hole that's kind of under here, but it's still something that could be addressed and made better on any transmissions in this family, the drainage into the 5th gear region, especially as you're doing an initial fill. So when you have a completely bone dry transmission like we're going to when we're all done here, it's definitely good to not even bother touching that fill port. Just fill it up with the exact amount Volkswagen says should be in there for a completely bone dry transmission, which is probably going to be near another quart additional what the 5-speeds normally has. And then obviously as you drive it, with the 02J case, it's going to drain better in here anyway. And then as you drive it, more and more will also slosh into the 5th and 6th gear chamber. And so long as you get the quantity correct, you should be fine. And after you've driven it for a while, this applies to the 0A4 5-speeds as well. Once the oil is all splashed into the differential side of things and getting into the 5th gear chamber, the fill plug should actually be a pretty accurate place to check the oil level in theory. The main issue is the poor drainage into both the 5th gear chamber as well as the differential chamber with this case design. No idea why Volkswagen did that. You know, maybe this is part of them trying to reinforce the whole pinion area, because on these 02Js, especially as you get higher powered cars, if you're driving them hard, they do sometimes blow out this piece of casting. This whole thing will break apart, and you'll see the pinion gear straight on the clutch side of things. This whole piece will just blow right off. But there's also another reinforcement you can put on there called the pinion brace, which I will probably be doing on mine. So there's actually, got one right here. It'll secure right on there and give it this little additional support once you torque the nuts as they're poking through there. The slits poke through there. So yeah, lots to do. But yeah, we got it apart. My next step, I need to get all of the gears off of the pinion shaft, and then that way I can get the pinion itself with no bearings, no gears, or anything on it to the machine shop so they can remove about a 1 millimeter of diameter, I think it is,